Welcome to the David Kurten Show. Now, over the last 6 months of the Starmer regime, we have experienced a lot of things which are very, very disturbing. Attacks on free speech, the whole attitude to grooming gangs where people are concerned about them have been smeared as far right. Not, and of course, the economic attacks on farmers and workers and employers and all kinds of other things. Now, is there a simple solution to this? I am delighted to have with me today on the show Graham Moore from the English Constitution Society, who speaks very, very eloquently about the English Constitution and how this might be a solution to all of the things that have attacked our freedom, our free speech, and our democracy, not just over the last 6 months, but over the last few decades. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Graham.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me on.
Yeah, great to have you on. And, one of the things that people are very, very concerned about currently is the whole situation and issue with grooming gangs, rape gangs, as they'll probably be more accurately called. And a lot of that is due to Elon Musk highlighting it over in the United States. And other people. That's all good. The more people that highlight this, the better. But what concerns me, and probably you and a lot of people, is that there hasn't been a proper national inquiry into this, and this has been blocked. And I wonder if it's because there's a lot of people in positions of power, councillors, police officers, MPs, who are actually guilty of perpetrating these crimes as well as covering them up. What do you think on all of this? And is there something that can be done about it?
Well, obviously, I deal with the Constitution and the rule of law. And it's interesting that you say that, because there's another set of information, for example, that's never been released from the US, which is, and you've mentioned it, these people in positions of power and information about them at the Epstein Island, and releasing the client lists, for example, which may be about to happen. But it's interesting from a constitutional point of view, just to make sure everyone understands. England has a constitution, Scotland has a constitution, and when these people who don't like the fact that we have a constitution reference we haven't got one, I always say to them, so have we got a constitutional monarchy if we don't have a constitution? And the constitutional element puts all these pieces in together. So just to make sure everyone understands this, our late and gracious Queen Elizabeth II put into legislation, enacted a piece of legislation, assented to a piece of legislation on the tricentenary of the English Bill of Rights in 1988. And that was basically called Section 134 of the Criminal Justice Act 1988. And what it was is torture. And it fits exactly, so that's it on the screen as everyone's seeing it, just to make sure everyone is understanding this, because it's very important. It fits what's going on now with the torture and rape gangs. There's a particular part of this. So if I read out a part, I'm not going to bore everyone with a whole law, right? But it's a tiny section of law. I'll start, shall I, with just saying there would be none of this nonsense of a judge, for example, saying on a guilty verdict, I'll give you probation, I'll give you a fine, or I'll send you to prison for 6 months. At Section 6, it clearly states the person who commits the offence of torture shall be liable on conviction on indictment to imprisonment for life.
Wow.
There's it's a mandatory all-life sentence. Now, the key part of this legislation is, so there's two parts that I'll read out. One, a public official or person acting in official capacity, whatever his nationality, commits the offence of torture if in the United Kingdom or elsewhere he intentionally inflicts severe pain or suffering. There's two elements to it, so they can be separate because there's an or in the law, right? On another in performance or purported performance of his official duties. So most people read the first part and say, yeah, so what's that got to do with it? Well, that's for individuals that are actual public officials. Section 2 says a person not falling within this subsection 1 above commits the offence of torture, whatever his nationality, if A, in the United Kingdom or elsewhere he intentionally inflicts severe pain or suffering on another at the instigation or, there's that little or again, with the consent or acquiescence of a public official or a person acting as an official in an official capacity, and the official or other person is performing or purporting to perform his official duties when he instigates the commission of the offence or consents or acquiesces to it, right? Then you go along to section 3. I'm not going to go on much longer. It is immaterial whether the pain or suffering is physical or mental and whether it is caused by an act, keyword again, omission. What does this law tell you? It tells you that if you omit from any previous investigation or any form of inquiry the facts that show you who this group of people are and how you can stop them, right? If you omit them facts, you then become liable under this section of the law. That means police officers, local councillors, the council, etc. Here's the key thing again. If you go back up to those two words, consent or acquiescence. What does acquiescence mean? It means basically if you have allowed it to carry on without sticking your hand up and saying, listen, this is what's going on, this needs to stop, or you have in some way allowed it to continue, that's acquiescence, right? Again, that does two things. Firstly, it converts the rapist, organised crime, whatever they are, Pakistani Muslims, it converts them, right? So converts them to what? It converts them to torturers. That's what this law says. And secondly, and most importantly, the people who have acquiesced or consented or omitted from any report or any police investigation, it converts them into co-conspirators, right? This law is crucially important, and the reason is there doesn't need to be an inquiry. There needs to be a prosecution. This is indictable only, goes in front of a jury, can be done all over the country with the juries all over the country, and the people can be brought to justice, including the police officers that allowed it to happen, the local councils and the CEOs. Get this though, people, even the attorney generals, even Gordon Brown, if it can be proved that he wrote that letter, that is acquiescence to torture. And he can be brought before a jury in England for the offence of torture and tried. You can try Tony Blair, for example, under this law, because they are state officials. And technically, in law, you can also try the King of England. Why? Because if they won't try him in this country, you can use something else, which is called universal jurisdiction, and try King Charles III in the United States of America. Because this comes under UNCAT, which is the United Nations Convention against Torture, and it's where this law came from. It was enacted for a reason, not just domestically, but internationally. And that's the thing that people are really trying to understand. So that's the law. What I'm trying to do to say to everyone, and again, there are many people. Listen, I'm not being disrespectful to Tommy Robinson. I don't particularly like the guy. There's many people I don't like. GB News has been told about this time and time again. Charlie Peters, the guy who's been going around, this is what's happening. The only people who are allowing us to speak about this are on Rumble and with people like yourself. Bearing in mind, I'm an English constitutionalist. I'm not left or right politics, right? So from an American point of view, I'm a constitutionalist, an English constitutionalist. Our constitution was exported to America with our language, right? America never Americanized England. England anglicized the United States of America. People must remember that. But that's it, David. In a nutshell, if you want a solution, it's nothing. An inquiry is a whitewash and a cover-up. This law, tiny paragraph, enacted by the late Queen, that nails it, and she did it to protect us against the state.
Well, Graham, I always learn something from you whenever I talk to you and have a conversation with you on the show. And, I've been calling for an inquiry up to now because I thought that that's the thing that we need to do, because obviously there are hundreds of thousands of girls that have been violated, tortured. And there's also been counselors and police officers and social workers and children's workers and MPs and perhaps even judges and prosecutors who have been guilty of actually perpetrating the crimes or allowing it to happen. So I thought, well, a national public inquiry is what we need to do to get to the bottom of who is responsible for letting this happen. But this sounds like a much easier solution is already there in law, but I've never heard anyone speak about apart from you. And if you just go to a court that is fair and just and has a jury of 12 men, good and true, then they could put these people in prison for life. And perhaps that's what needs to happen. Is there any possibility of this happening, however, given that some of these people who are in positions of power would seek to block any prosecution on this basis? I mean, could it be done?
And it's a great question. Can it be done? The answer is yes. This law is there. It's never been used for obvious reasons, right? But the thing that I will say to you is this was brought in for a number of reasons, because they were complying and ratifying the United Nations Convention Against Torture. Part of that ratification was allowing for what's known as universal jurisdiction. So if they refuse to bring charges, so the state is not going to prosecute itself for torture, especially at higher level. But what they did in 1988 is they ratified, actually it was earlier than that, they ratified the convention of the UN Convention Against Torture. And by doing so, they agreed, this is the great part, they agreed for an external jurisdiction to prosecute them for torture, because they knew at the time, so that there was a degree of honesty and sincerity from whoever was in charge at that time, right? And what they said was, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to sign up to this. We're going to ratify this, right? So in law, they did two things. They ratified it under international law and brought in to assist us something called universal jurisdiction. And jurisdiction is very important. And it means people like Elon Musk, for example, we've said you need to bring this in Texas. Why Texas? Well, you can go to any area of the United States. It has been used before, universal jurisdiction, in effect to prosecute someone who's British, funny enough, for torture. And just to make sure everyone's got this clear, right? Why is this so simple? Because it can't be whitewashed, because the public gallery can watch what's going on. And most importantly, the eyes of the world can be on every single one of them. And by the way, you can have these trials. going on at every single clown court in the country to go through all these different people and all the trials that would need to happen. Importantly, there is no ifs or buts. There's only a mandatory life sentence, an all life sentence. I don't even believe in this case that tariffs can come in, right? So it's section 6, it states a person who commits the offence of torture shall be liable on conviction on indictment to imprisonment for life. There is none of this. The judge will, I'll give you 6 months because you didn't know. No. This law identifies exactly who the people are that come under this. And secondly, there is a conversion. Now, everyone likes a convert, of course. And this is a conversion because at section 2, it tells you exactly how this happens. There's 2 elements to it. Again, it can be brought, and if you can provide evidence of psychological suffering, I suggest that rape is psychological suffering, and people don't realise this, that the non-prosecution, because our laws state that justice has to be seen to be done and everybody is equal under the law, and if a victim is not getting justice, it causes psychological harm to them, right? So there's 2 elements, but it can be either or. The secondary is obviously the torture itself. Being raped as a 12-year-old with a broken bottle. If you go back through the history of this, a 12-year-old being nailed, her tongue being nailed to a table and raped with a baseball bat. That is torture. That's sexual torture. So again, this law covers it. You put it before a jury. There's no inquiry. The inquiry is in fact professional police officers and others supplying evidence to that court of law and telling the jurors, this is what happened, this is how it happened, and then you can present evidence to the court for this law that says that the state acquiesced. And the reason they acquiesced is because this information was available. They didn't put it in a report or an inquiry or removed it from a police investigation, very importantly, or instructed the police not to prosecute and the CPS not to prosecute. So everyone at every level can be held personally liable in front of a jury in this country. It's 1,000 times better than any inquiry that you still get the cover-ups. And at the end of this process, which we're pointing out to your audience, if they get a guilty, guess what? Life imprisonment. Bye. Right? So everyone can see justice being done. Elon Musk, right, should support people like yourself that are actually supporting this. We've sent this on numerous occasions to Rupert Lowe and to Nigel Farage, but we've also sent it to the victims. So we're not getting a response from it because people are just, they're like rabbits caught in a headlight. All of a sudden, someone said, you're all talking about an inquiry. There's actually a law enacted that deals with this. It's already law. You don't need to reintroduce any laws or construct a law. It's here. Use it.
See, there is a big problem in the UK, particularly, of what we now call 2-tier policing and 2-tier justice. And it seems that these people who have been doing these grooming gangs, as well as other people who have been involved in, having pictures of children on their phone, for example. I have to be careful with my words, but I think everyone understands what I mean by saying that, and they get let off, like Hugh Edwards, this BBC anchorman, was let off with a suspended sentence. But then you get people put in prison for 2, 3, even 7.5 years just recently for posts on social media opposing mass migration and being critical of the people who are actually perpetrating migrant crime. So they seem to get harsher sentences for using their free speech than the people who have actually committed rape or the people who have aided and abetted that who don't seem to have anything going on. But they're not using this law that you're talking about, this torture law. They're using other laws. But then do we actually have a problem with the judges in this country? I mean, that's the question I ask myself a lot, because you've got these, we ostensibly have the power to choose our MPs, or that, the system is a little bit difficult with the first past the post system and every party being the same, essentially. But judges are appointed by some committee that's very opaque. They're there for life, and there's no accountability to the public. If a judge goes rogue and starts making bad judgments and putting people in prison for free speech, but then letting people off who have done things with children, there's no way of getting rid of them. What can we do about that? Has the system gone wrong?
Yeah, massively. But just let me just advise you on this, right? There is something you can do about a rogue judge, right? There's a number of things. Some people say you can't sue a judge. You can sue a judge. It's in my talk books here, right? You can sue a judge, but that's more difficult because of the way people have been brainwashed that you can't sue a judge. You can sue a judge, and they can perjure their oath, which is a very serious offence. But making sure people understand this, there is a process in our legal system and our constitution, but more importantly, for getting rid of judges, is called impeachment. So, but the process that we have to impeach judges, right, is that members of parliament are the ones who impeach the judge. The problem is that the members of parliament are the people who have created the bad system that we've got now, because they invariably act unconstitutionally. So there is a process, it's called impeachment, but how are you going to get British judges, because there are no English MPs, right? So there's Scottish MPs, there's Welsh MPs, there's Irish MPs, and then there's British MPs. The whole point, we haven't got an English parliament, and I'm not talking about devolution here. I'm talking about, if you really want to know how to reset England back to the justice system and the real justice of the common law and the constitution, it is to void the Acts of Union, right? It is in bad faith, and I'm not talking about repealing. It does so many positive things for England, and it completely removes the power of the British. It's like unplugging them and then cutting a plug off and say, that's it. Your reign of terror is over, right? And the English are independent again, right? So it's like uncaging the English. So that's the first thing. Getting back to what you've just said, are there processes? The first thing you need to understand about the system and picking judges, as it were, politically, is that's always been unconstitutional, right? The people that changed that was Tony Blair and the Fabian Society when they created something which was completely unconstitutional, and that was the Constitutional Reform Act of 2005, which started the process that you now see in place. The Supreme Court in this country, England, is completely unlawful because we have a different method of justice and system, and it's called the House of Lords, right? The judges there were known as the Law Lords, right? And their process of picking the senior judges to discuss cases at the highest level wasn't the Constitutional Reform Act. And then once they did this, by the way, this is all Marxism, because the Fabian Society are Marxists. The entire cabinet in place at the moment are all Fabians. The Fabian Society have boasted that they've got 141 Fabians elected. And what they haven't told you is the whole of the cabinet are Fabian Society members or executive members, including Keir Starmer, right? The last time that happened, we went to war with Iraq, completely against the nation's consent. They ignored a march with 1.5 million people on it. How do I know that? Because I was on that march, right? I am not left all right, I am a constitutionalist. And these people have chipped away at our constitution by stealth, because that's what Marxists do, right? So when you look at the Fabian Society, it's really important to understand who they are and what they are, right? What they do, they've got two emblems or logos. One is a wolf in sheep's clothing. They're telling you who and what they are. And the second is a turtle. Slowly,
Right.
cat and monkey. That's what they're doing, right? And what they do is they chip away. They are completely different to communists, right? So communists believe in revolution. Pick up a gun at a gunpoint, shoot the people, take control. This is what you're doing, whether you like it or not. Marxists don't do that. They do it bit by bit by bit. And that's why people of a certain generation, I'm one of them, remember being free, or freer than what we are now, right? A lot freer. But the younger generation won't know what freedom feels like, and they feel like it's natural. That's what they did with the Soviet Union. So that's the answer. The truest, freest answer is to void the Acts of Union. And again, I've said to you before, that doesn't mean we leave the Union of Crowns, right? You're still in the brotherhood with the other nations. It's just not political anymore. You've removed politics from it, right? And people don't realise you'd still be part of the Commonwealth, right? There's many countries that have nothing to do with the politics of this country that are part of the Commonwealth. Even 4 states of the United States of America are still Commonwealth states, right? And people don't even realise that.
I didn't know that. I imagine Texas. You talk about Texas a lot. Is that one of them?
So the interesting part with Texas, and I always say this to people, to love Texas is to love England, and to love England is to love Texas. Culturally, they are aligned with the English. If you go out there, they may wear Stetsons and cowboy boots. By the way, I've got both here because I've actually been lectures in Texas. But the amusing part of it is in 1836, when in their state constitution, they adopted the English common law in its entirety. So culturally, Texas is aligned with England. And if you presented this to a Texas-trained judge under universal jurisdiction for torture, for example, they'd absolutely get it. Even though they're a federal judge, if they've been trained and their license and their legal training is in Texas, they're aligned with the English. So they would understand that this is completely forbidden, and they would prosecute to the fullest extent under universal jurisdiction the law. So there's lots of things that people don't realize about America and the Constitution, and it is really important that people understand we are not being Americanized. We anglicized America. The structure of America as it is today is an English structure.
Yeah, and it's far better than what we got today. Like you say, under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, they introduced all kinds of measures that people didn't realize. I mean, the Constitutional Reform Act is not something I'm very familiar with, but they changed the way the courts were run. They made a Supreme Court. They decimated the power and the function of the House of Lords. Now we got Keir Starmer in, and he's doing even more. He's like finishing off what Tony Blair started. Not that the fake Conservatives for 14 years were not continuing what he did, but the pace slowed down a bit. But I think now the pace is picking up again, and Keir Starmer seems to want to finish off the House of Lords and perhaps introduce a completely different body, which is democratically, as it says, elected Senate of the regions and cities, which I think would be, something that is nothing to do with the traditional Constitution of England.
So not only are you absolutely correct with what you've just said, there's a number of things they intend to do. By the way, this is all part of their plan. First of all, people that need to understand that Parliament and the courts are restrained, and the Crown are restrained. We have a separation of powers here, are restrained by the Constitution. It's the Constitution, as Sir John Laws once said, is really sovereign, not Parliament. Parliament is a primary legislator, but it isn't sovereign. And the way you know that is that let's put it this way, even by letter patent or otherwise, if the Crown was not to assent to law, it doesn't become law. Well, therefore, Parliament is not sovereign, right? Because someone else can say stop. And the last person to actually do that was Queen Anne. But the other group of people that should and do have a full constitutional right to step in and nullify law and void law, right, is the judiciary. They can step in and say that law is unconstitutional and you cannot enact it in its current form, right? But the problem is with government, or let's say ideologically aligned institutions, so the slow march through the institutions has corrupted that process. So as a constitutionalist, I can see that. And I go around the country on English constitutional seminars and I explain it to people and what the process is. But getting back to the key point, it's become corrupted. You've just nailed that point. It's not just the Labour Party, the Conservative and Union Party. There is no Conservative Party in this country. The only, again, and I'm not just saying this, I want people to understand what I'm saying, right? The regionalisation is part of the destruction from the European Union of England. They've already completed it with Scotland. They've already completed it with Wales. They've already, and they intend to unify Ireland, right? Which isn't the way it should be done. There's another way of doing it. It's a different way of doing it, which is Northern Ireland being completely independent like the Isle of Man, right? But people need to understand what's going on with regionalisation. The only person I've ever seen that really truly understands it, believe it or not, is Dominic Cummings, right? Right. And the other group of people that actually listen, apart from the English Constitution Party, is another great group of people called the Heritage Party, because they understand the heritage of England, right? They're the only people that allow England to be spoken about. Because it's
the Heritage Party is fantastic. I would agree with you on that point.
So again, if people only know, so even from a point, so let's just say that, let's say the Heritage Party. The difference with the Heritage Party is they would say, Graham, you're an English constitutionalist. You've got 30 years experience of reading law, right? You're detached from the state. In other words, you're not feeding on the state in any way. You've got no dog in the race, right? Apart from justice, right? How would you create this policy so it's constitutional? And by the way, this is supposed to happen in law, right? So you're supposed to have law drafters that before they put a law before first reading, the law drafters are supposed to understand the English Constitution. And by the way, so are members of Parliament. Members of Parliament are there, right, to protect you and your rights and liberties against the power of the state. They're there to represent the constituents, not a political party, right? So once you start to explain that to people, they go, so why are people like you not involved, with keeping the political parties constitutional? And what I say is I am. There's only one group of people, reform, no good, right? They're not interested. Right, they're only interested in the British concept of justice, which has failed the victims of these rape gangs and torture gangs. They're not grooming gangs, they're rape and torture gangs, right? Reform completely refused to listen, right? Because of the type of people they are. They're basically Tories, right? And if you go back and understand from a constitutional element what a Tory means, it means a robber baron. Right. So again, People are voting for something and being conned. The Labour Party was created by the Fabian Society. Who created the Fabian Society? The Rothschilds, right? The Rockefellers. They funded and all these other groups of people, wealthy industrialists, pharmaceuticals, created the Fabian Society, and they did it to control the working class. And then once people understand what's actually going on from a constitutional point of view, it's easy to fix. But because it's people like myself who are just working class, right? I'm just a working class man. It's unfortunate for them that I understand the Constitution. I've read law for 30 years. They won't give me a voice in the courts. But under the old English system, I would be known as a common lawyer, a real lawyer, someone who represents people without having any allegiance to the state. The only allegiance you've got is to the rule of law. And that's how it should be.
But it seems, you know, the gatekeepers are keeping you out, because you should be allowed to go and represent someone in a court of law just through having knowledge. But you have maybe, you know, there's people who haven't done all of the courses and been affirmed and invited to the bar, called to the bar, and all these kind of things. But the people who have, it seems, you know, are not really interested in the Constitution or being constitutionalists. I think that's a fantastic thing, and you explained it very well. But the two things that they all seem to be concerned about these days, whether they're judges or MPs or lords or even the king, is equality, diversity and inclusion, and the climate. And everything seems to fall into those frames, and they're more concerned about those things than the Constitution, which actually is what they should be doing. And, you know, I think we're not going to get what we want with all of these people there. That they need to be replaced by, you know, people like you and me, who are going to actually do the right thing for the people in this country, because the DEI agenda, the climate agenda, is destructive. It's destructive to freedom and it's destructive to prosperity. We're not going to get that unless we kick them out. I mean, obviously, I'm engaged in trying to build the Heritage Party and stand candidates and take the place of councillors and then MPs ultimately, to restore our nation. And you're working to, you know, teach people and bring an understanding of these things. But what I guess I'd finish off by just encouraging people to get involved in politics, in you know, in law. If you know, we're going to make a plan for people to do this and restore our Constitution, you know, people are interested in doing that, what should they do you think?
There's a number of things. First of all, you should align yourself with someone who actually understands a political party that understands the English Constitution in particular. There's no such thing as a British Constitution. There never has been. That's why they're trying to implement a British Bill of Rights. We've got an English Bill of Rights. It's still valid. It's still law, and it's very good. The problem is it's not being enforced by a Marxist communist regime. That's intentional, right? Because what they want to do is rewrite the Constitution in their form, because that's what the Marxists intend, right? What we need to do is stop them, because once that happens, all is lost. The same as what happened with the Soviet Union. So making sure that people understand, they can get in touch with us at the English Constitution Society or the English Constitution Party. We are a political party as well as a society educating people, but the difference with us is our manifesto, right, isn't like every other manifesto. It is the English Constitution in its entirety, right? But we are very strategic in where we stand. So where I stood last time was against the Speaker of the House of Commons, because I said he was acting on many occasions unconstitutionally. Recently, he did the same, where he actually made a declaration as the Speaker, where the House could not debate what had happened to do with Southport. What I said was that's unconstitutional, and basically he needs to be taken to court for that. That's wrong. What he's just done constitutionally. So I got 1,007 votes, But the media won't talk about is that no one will allow the information that we hold as constitutionalists to be propagated, except for people who are in alignment with the heritage of that, which is what I've said before. So if you really want to get engaged, find a political party that believes in England, right? Because we're the largest constituent nation of Britain as an island, right? And once you do that, they will see that their grip, their iron grip, no different to the Soviet Union. And by the way, people, they got rid of the Soviet Union for a reason, right? And when they did in 1991, they simply devolved it. We've got a legal process to do the same thing. And you literally feel the grip of communism release if you void the Acts of Union. And again, doesn't mean you're bad friends with the Scots or the Welsh or the Irish. In fact, the Welsh are still in with us because it happened well before the Principality. Wales became a Principality well before the Acts of Union in 1536. So all I'm saying to people is you align with people that understand the rule of law and understand what the job is of a member of parliament. And it isn't to create laws to oppress and suppress you. It's the reverse. So that's it. I would say there's a line. I'd certainly, if I could, try and push Dominic Cummings to understand, bearing in mind that his uncle was Sir John Laws, who was a English constitutional expert. Sadly, he passed away during COVID. And he was the guy who's responsible for the metric martyrs decision and ruling, which was a very famous constitutional case in which he laid out the constitutional hierarchy of the laws. So again, Dominic Cummings, yourself, Heritage, English Constitution Party. Problem is, again, you're going up against the feudal oligarch system. Billionaires that want to crush her, whereas we have got the reverse of that. We want billionaires to be billionaires and millionaires and working class people to be respected, and we all work together. That's the whole point, not one group crushing another.
Yeah, I call them the cabal. Basically, it's a globalist cabal, but they're active here in this country as well. And exactly. They need to be defeated. They need to be brought down to size. Anyway, look, Graham, it's been fantastic talking to you. As always, I've learned so much, and you explain everything very well and very, very good points. And hopefully we can implement some of them. But we're up against a big beast. But we can take it down if we all work together. So, Graham, thank you for all you're doing, and thanks for coming on the show. Really good to see you again.